Welcome back. Nigeria's 2023 presidential election bears the record for being the most competitive election in Nigeria since the country returned to democratic rule in 1999. It's also the election with the lowest turnout, with about 25.2 million voters being accredited. Being Africa's giant and most populous nation, other African countries are very interested in the elections due to many reasons.
Now, Nigeria's democratic stability and economy fit into the stability of democracy and the economy of other African nations. Similarly, new policies introduced by the newly elected president might affect the migration patterns and trade arrangements in other African regions. Now, joining us is Jackson Mwesigwa, I beg your pardon. He is the chairperson of the National Youth Platform in Uganda, and he joins us from Kampala to discuss what Nigeria's elections means for, of course, Uganda and, of course, other parts of the continent. Good morning, Jackson. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, and thank you for having me.
All right, we probably would just get straight into it, with your take on, how relevant the elections in Nigeria are, of course, concerning the rest of the continent.
Of course, Nigerian elections are not only important to Nigerians, but also they matter a lot to the African continent. Nigeria, you're the biggest economy in Africa. And everywhere you go, you meet Nigerians. I always talk to my friends, even in Europe, they tell me that everywhere you go, you meet Nigerians. So even here, we have so many Nigerians here, and we love you so much. And so whatever happens there, we always get an update, and we always, we always follow up closely. And so we've been closely following up your election. But if I'm to, beef it up, I think most of us here are quite disappointed because just like most of the young people, I think we expected a younger president, but at the same time, we must also respect the will of Nigerians. If that's what democracy gives, then we must accept that you now have quite an elderly president, which is not so different from what is happening here, because we also have a 78-year-old who seems to look like yours. So some kind of arrangement politically.
That's something that I was going to point out, that Yoweri Museveni is 78, and so it does seem that we have presidents and president-elect over the ages of 70. And I want to ask.
Ours is 70.
Okay.
Well, our president-elect is 70.
Okay, our president-elect. So I wanted to ask, what this means for governance in Africa in terms of having. You did say that you were expecting to see a much younger person taking the reins of government. What does this mean for government in Africa? And looking at Uganda, for instance, there have been conversations about Muhoozi Kainerugaba taking over from Yoweri Museveni. And are these, how does this make the people of Uganda feel? And just basically looking at the general climate, what does this mean for the continent?
First of all, we as Ugandans, we've been agitating for a younger leadership, and that's what we also expected, as I said earlier, from Nigerians, because we thought you'd set a precedence, especially by young people, coming up and saying, let's participate so that we can have a young president. Of course, even the youngest in your election wasn't that young per se, but we expected at least the youngest to be the president. And in Uganda here, it has also been the same cry. We've been crying for young leadership. As you said earlier, our president is 78, though he looks much younger than your elected president. And so we've been really agitating for young leadership. And most of us here, we are young people. Most of our voters here are between 18 and 35. And so we've been yearning for young leadership. But you talked about the president, the son of the current president, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. Of recent, he has been moving around and doing what most, political players have been calling campaigning. He has moved around showing his intentions to, contest in 2026. But at the same time, we've been asking ourselves whether his father still will allow him to contest. But that said and done, we've been really craving for a young leadership. And then if I may give you a general feeling here in Uganda, we feel a bit disappointed because we thought Nigeria would set a precedence so that by 2026, we can also maybe follow suit by electing a younger president.
Yeah, but Nigeria is referred to as the giant of Africa. So I want you to also, talk from that perspective. It seems to, of course, want to be Africa's big brother, or is Africa's big brother. The economic situation in Nigeria, how much does it affect, how other countries, of course, fare? We, of course, are still struggling with the economic challenges from COVID-19. And, of course, some would also blame Russia's invasion of Ukraine and some of all of that. But we remember, a few years ago, the Nigerian government shut down the borders to stop the importation of rice and other products, which created some economic challenges here in Nigeria. So how relevant, are the decisions that are made economically here in Nigeria to other African countries?
Of course, Nigeria being the biggest economy in Africa, you are so influential in terms of what happens in other economies. As I said earlier, most of the Nigerians who are in other African countries, even beyond Africa, they go there to do trade because we believe that the Nigerians are rich. You have a lot, your economy is big, so you have a lot of economic, leverage. So, but if we are talk about the economy compared to Uganda here, our economy is so small. And so we expect, we always expect, good, perfect democracy to also boost the economy. So when we get such disappointments in the politics, sometimes we also get a feeling that the economic part of the economic part of our sector may not also go well. So we believe that Nigeria, putting aside to being the largest economy, most of your players actually in the politics are rich people, which is contrary to what is happening here in Uganda. If you look at Kenya, you cannot enter into politics if you don't have enough money. So Nigeria, we've been reading about your president-elect being one of the richest Nigerians. But here in Uganda, if you wanted to talk about the top politicians in terms of their economic standing, you wouldn't put them at any level in terms of those who have been called the rich and the billionaires here. So the economy plays a bigger role in politics, but in Uganda here we don't tend to give it much attention. We pay much into the political bit of it. We don't look at the economic part of it, which I think is very essential. We also need rich politicians entering politics because you cannot separate money from politics.
Democracy and the fabrics of democracy as is, and laid against the backdrop of what is expected. There have been conversations about the fact that what we have right now, it's maybe losing its touch, and I'm talking about on the continent, not just in one country. If you look at the 2023 general elections in Nigeria, and you look at the conversations about Nigeria's democracy, how do you think this would affect or impact the concept of democracy around the continent?
Of course, we also a bit optimistic about your electoral system because yes, you may not be there yet, but at least you've shown that after every 2 terms you change a leader, which is not the case in most African countries, even here. However, we also we're a bit pessimistic on the other side. Because when you look at what is happening in Kenya, yes, they always change presidents, but as you stated it earlier in your briefing, you're expecting violence today in Kenya, and so it seems not to have changed much in terms of stability of the country. Now, when you come here to Uganda, we are relatively stable. The whole country is stable. Your country is not stable in the north. Also, our northeast is relatively not stable, but we don't have that kind of violence. So it's two-way. When you look at countries that are changing leaders after every maybe 10 years, those that have term limits, and us here who don't have term limits, the difference is not that much. But all said and done, I think it's good to change leaders, especially to attract investors, because most of these investors, when they are not sure of the political stability of the economy, it scares them away. And so we believe that you're not yet there, but then you're also at least setting some good impression that at least we can see changes. The question still relies on you, on whether the change of the face, is so important to Africans, and whether it solves issues. But I think it's just the face, but the system remains the same. But good that you can change leaders. I hope that we can also pick it up from you and the rest of the African continent, so that we can at least expect change after every maybe 10 or 5 years.
All right, Jackson Mewes-Gua, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we do hope that Nigeria's elections are conducted as we count down to the gubernatorial and House of Assembly elections, that we see the elections being conducted in a free, fair, credible manner, and this impacts the continent positively. We look forward to having you again, maybe after Nigeria's gubernatorial elections.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.